not.
Bring in former federal judge and president of Dickinson College, John Jones. It's good to see you. So as a judge, you're sitting there and you realize that the lawyer is maybe losing his audience, the jury. It's been a long day. It's going to be an even longer day by our calculations. There's still several hours to go here. They've had lunch. I might note that, some of the places where they could get food from in that immediate area is Little Italy. So there's plenty of pasta and bread to go around. What do you do as a judge?
Well, the first thing I'm tempted to say is you make sure there's a pot of coffee in the jury room so that they can ingest some caffeine during the break. And that goes for the judge as well. That's a tough spot after lunch. But when you're the presiding judge and you see that you're starting to have some drift on the jury, what you have to do is really say to the lawyer, look, let me know when it's a good time to break. And you kind of wedge that in and give the lawyer the opportunity to wrap up whatever his or her sort of stream of thought is at that particular time. That has to be getting close, given what you're reporting about the conduct of some of the jurors.
It's also, by the way, quite warm in there, and that doesn't help. Yasmin Masugin was reminding me, but even this morning it was quite warm in there. How do you feel about how Judge Merchan has done today? What about what Todd Blanche did a little bit earlier when he was finishing his summation, saying you can't send a man to prison based on the testimony of Michael Cohen? The judge was not happy about that. He told Todd Blanche he was not happy about that, and he gave a corrective instruction to the jury regarding those words from Todd Blanche.
I think he handled it well, and I agree with your expert panelists that it was not a mistake by Todd Blanche. It was very intentional. I think the curative instruction that was given by the judge was exactly right. The other thing is, it strikes me in the presentation by the defense, I kind of would characterize it as the sort of this is an important man defense, as if to say that the proof has to be higher than beyond a reasonable doubt. Because you're dealing with a former president and maybe future president of the United States. One of the things you may hear Judge Merchan say tomorrow is that all persons stand equally before the law, whether prince or pauper, rich or poor, the president or not, as the case may be. You have to judge everyone the same way when they come before you. He'll instruct the jury something like that, and that's important as well. So the charge is going to be super important in this case.
Has he opened himself up to any possible appeals from the defense team? Anything that maybe he stepped out of place on?
No, I'm not seeing anything that he's stepped out of place. I think he's been eminently fair to both sides under the circumstances. Tempers flare sometimes. As I've frequently said, judges are all too human, but I think he's handled the case generally with distinction. I think the most probable path for an appeal, as some of your panelists have discussed, is the fact that this is a novel prosecution that hasn't been tried before. That would be central to an appeal in the event that the former president is convicted. But I'll tell you, I think from what I see, the defense is in what I would call sort of a doomsday defense mode. I think they're playing for a hung jury at this point. I just can't see, given all the evidence that's been presented in this case, 12 jurors agreeing on an acquittal. I think that's a very, very tough path.
Isn't a hung jury going to be spun as victory by the candidate, the Republican candidate for president?
Well, I think obviously, because they probably won't convene another trial, if ever, until after the election. He'll make much of that. I'm a former judge and not a political analyst, but I think that there's grounds to convict as well in this case, and it's up to the prosecution, as your folks have said, that they have to put together this kind of mosaic in a way that fits.
Well, let me ask you about that. Since this is
yes.
a case of first impression, it's a novel case. What is your overall take on the way this is constructed as an indictment? Well,
I think the indictment itself is you know, I'm looking at it from from the perspective of the judge and the charge in this case. I think the challenge for Judge Merchan is to craft a charge that is consistent with what the law is. For example, accessories, conspiracies, and so forth. I think that can be done in this case, but he has to be very careful that he weaves that charge together the right way when he presents it to the jury tomorrow. Closings are really important, of course. But the charge is extra important as well in this case, just because of the way the prosecution has been framed.
We haven't gotten the instructions themselves. We have no confirmation on what they will be. The lawyers have gotten them, though. And Donald Trump posted something on social media yesterday that suggests he knows what they are. He said that it's, and I'm paraphrasing, it's unfair for the judge to give the jury 3 different options for the underlying felony and that they don't have to be unanimous on all of them. I imagine that he potentially got information that the jury will be able to decide the underlying felony is either the federal election violation, the state election violation, or the tax violation, and they don't have to be in agreement with all of those.
I think that's consistent with the law in this case. He may consider the law to be unfair, but that's that. And speaking, you know, of social media, the other thing that I'm going to be interested to see, because I think this is a tough day for everybody listening to the closings, including the former president. You know, he sort of acted out. If he didn't violate the gag order over the weekend, he came close, I think, to doing it. There's going to be the opportunity for him to act out again tonight before this case goes to the jury, probably tomorrow. That will bear some scrutiny, I think, because he's got to be very stressed out listening to these closings and the way that this is coming together. Judge Merchan may have his hands full as proceedings start tomorrow, depending on what the former president posts tonight.
Yeah, I wonder. I mean, can he? That's such a good question. Can he potentially? He's already threatened to put Donald Trump in jail. He's not going to put Donald Trump in jail while the jury has the case. I mean, that would be a giant risk, right?
I don't think he'll put him in jail, and I think the former president is probably smart enough not to cross that line. But, you know, given the sort of spasm of social media posts that he did over the weekend and just the force of those posts, you have to believe that there's a potential for that to happen again tonight. You know, talking about the jury instructions themselves, you know, could become problematic at some point. He's really getting into the merits of the case. That may warrant some type of instruction, although the jurors are supposed to obviously stay off social media. It's just going to be interesting to see whether the pressure on the former president causes him to act out.
Or if he starts going after the jury or witnesses and breaking all the gag order rules in the moments.
It could happen.
Yeah, it certainly could happen. And Judge, as you said, Juan Merchan's going to have a lot to deal with then and a big decision to make.